Greetings, Father Mark signing on, continuing the course on the early modern papacy. Last time we made it up to the death of Pope Pius IV on December 9th, 1565, after successfully bringing to completion the Council of Trent. The cardinals, since he died late in December, the conclave went through December, and they did not reach a decision until the next year. So the conclave of 1565-66. The cardinals had all witnessed the culmination of the Council of Trent, because that just happened. The oldest among them may even have remembered the Fifth Lateran Council, which closed in 1517, 49 years earlier. None of them would have been, cardinals then, but they might have been alive at the time. But whether they had been alive for that council or not, they all knew that the reforms of the Fifth Lateran Council had not been seriously implemented. They knew that if the same neglect occurred with a much more comprehensive Council of Trent, that the Church in Europe would continue to spiral down into the abyss of warfare, corruption, theological confusion, and ultimately disintegration. So the conclave chose a man of severe personal asceticism, deep piety, and unflinching determination to maintain the purity of Catholic tradition. He was a Dominican, baptized Antonio Ghisleri, Ghisleri. He accepted election on January 7th, 1566, reigning for 6 years as the 225th Pope under the name Pius V. On the 22nd of May, 1712, he was canonized a saint by Pope Clement the 11th. So this is Saint Pius V. So, but he was born Antonio Ghisleri on the 17th of January, 1504, in Bosco Marengo, 50 miles southeast of Turin, where the shroud is kept. That's in the northwest region of Italy, the Piedmont region of, now is the nation of Italy. But at the time he was born, Italy was not a unified nation, as we'll discuss momentarily. His family was poor, but not destitute. He worked as a shepherd, and to earn extra money would often watch other flocks along with his family's own flocks. He was observed to sing prayers to himself while tending the flocks, and he had a lifelong affinity for animals. This evidence of natural piety caused one of his customers, the local Dominican priory, to take a closer look at him. They accepted him as a possible candidate, and soon his obvious sanctity earned him a place in the order. At his profession, he took the name in religion of the Archangel Michael, so this is Michele, because he understood that the Church was at war in more ways than one. In order to understand why he developed the way he did, it is necessary to catch up with the Dominicans, as well as with the situation in northern Italy, because Italy was not a single country at this point. Rather, it was fragmented into multiple independent municipalities, kingdoms, republics, duchies, counties, baronies, free cities, as well as large swaths of territory that were completely lawless. So baby Antonio was born in Milan. So let's see. So we're going to orient ourselves here. Okay, so there's Milan. See, Milan up there in northern Italy. And other power blocks were Venice, also in northern Italy. That's over here, Venice. And of course, Rome is here. And between Milan and Rome was the area of Tuscany, which is included Florence, the famous city of Florence, where the Medici were. We met them a number of times. And further down is Naples in the south. So we're up here in Milan, and Pavia is nearby. That whole region is Lombardy. So Milan is a distinct city, and Lombardy is a region. And within the region of Lombardy is also the city of Pavia, as well as others we're going to cover, as this is where he spent much of his life, so at least his early life. So keep all this in mind. Okay, so baby Antonio was born in the Duchy of Milan. Not the city of Milan, but the Duchy of Milan. And Milan was the capital of the city of Milan, was the capital of the Duchy of Milan, which encompassed much of the region of Lombardy. The city of Milan is the ancient Roman Mediolanum, which we visited in the patristics course. That is where Constantine legalized Christianity in 313. It is where St. Ambrose was later bishop, and where Ambrose baptized St. Augustine on April 25th, 387 AD. In the medieval course, we visited Lombardy, as it was one of the successor kingdoms after the fall of the empire. Later in the course, we covered Lanfranc of Bec, as well as St. Anselm of Bec, and later St. Anselm of Canterbury, who were originally from Lombardy. Today, Lombardy is one of the 20 administrative regions of Italy, as we would call them states. One of in the U.S., it would be one of the 20 states of Italy, covering 9,200 square miles. The region's geography is well irrigated by rivers and lakes replenished from alpine glaciers that always endowed Lombardy with a high intrinsic value, fertile soil, as well as many waterways to ease transport. And that's a natural blessing for those who have to grow food or fish to survive, but it also had a correlative negative in that it made it a target. So its natural blessings began in the Cottian Alps. That's the southwestern part of the Alpine Mountains. The Cottian Alps form the border between France and Italy. The highest peak in the chain, at least the Cottian chain of the Alps, is Monte Viso, Mount Viso, elevation 12,600 feet. It is on the Italian side of the present border with France. Bubbling from the northern slope of Monteviso, is the origin of the River Po, P-O. That the Po is the longest river in Italy. And on ancient imperial maps, the Roman maps, it was the river Eridanus. It flows eastward across northern Italy for 424 miles, emptying into the Adriatic Sea near Venice. The river flows through the many important cities like Turin, where the Shroud is, Piacenza, Ferrara. By the time of Pope Pius V's birth, or Antonio, the guy who became Pope Pius V, the River Po was connected to Milan, the city of Milan, by navigli, which were canals, we would say, man-made, dredged canals, channels, designed by Leonardo da Vinci. The Po Valley, the Po River Valley, had been Roman Cisalpine Gaul, meaning Gaul on the Roman side of the Alps, as distinct from Transalpine Gaul, which was on the present-day France, which is, on the other side of the Alps from the perspective of Rome. Milan is located in the northwestern section of the Po River Valley, midway between the River Po to the south and the foothills of the Alps to the north. And in the north, the foothills of the Alps in the north are decorated by the famous Swiss-Italian lakes. Lake Como, C-O-M-O, Lake Maggiore, M-A-G-G-I-O-R-E, and Lake Lugano, L-U-G-A-N-O, all of which are stunningly beautiful. The most important left bank tributary of the Po is the river Ticino, T-I-C-I-N-O, for which one of the current Swiss cantons is named. The Ticino is one of 4 rivers emanating from glaciers in the Gotthard region of the Alps. That's G-O-T-T-H-A-R-D. That is on the Swiss side. It's also near the border of Switzerland, the current border between Switzerland and Italy, but in this case the Gotthard, the Massif as they call it, a series of mountains, but it's all part of the Alpine chain, or on the Swiss side of the Alps, of the border. So from that one set of glaciers on the Gotthard, it's called the Water Tower of Europe. From that emanates the Ticino River, the Rhona River, the Reuss River, and the Rhine, the famous Rhine River. But for our purposes of the 4, the Ticino is the most important in this lecture, because the Ticino spills into one side of Lake Maggiore, and then out the other end into the Lombard countryside, where it intersects the River Po at the city of Pavia, P-A-V-I-A, 22 miles south of Milan. We visited Pavia in the medieval course several times, as it was the capital of the Lombard kingdom, that a successor kingdom of the Roman Empire that existed from 568 to 774. Recall, that Lombard kingdom was absorbed into the Holy Roman Empire after Charlemagne's conquest of that empire in 774 AD. Now, initially, he kept it as a kingdom, but a constituent to the Holy Roman Empire. It's just, he made himself king by right of conquest. From that time, once it was part of the Holy Roman Empire, Lombardy was subject to cyclical invasion by contending prospective colonizers because of the value of the soil and the water sources. So France, Germany, Spain, all contended. And so the Lombards, it was like the discovery of gold in Africa. It's great to have gold, but then you're a target, so it ended up being a bane for the centuries of people who lived there. Or not a bane necessarily, but a mixed blessing, I'll put it that way. Fast forwarding to 1277, the indigenous Italians reasserted a measure of autonomy, albeit as Ghibelline constituents of the German-dominated Holy Roman Empire. Remember the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, we talked about those. And in general, the Guelphs were the pro-papal Italians who favored local autonomy and a weak central government for the empire, whereas the Ghibellines were the pro-imperials who favored a strong central government for the empire. In the year 1277, the Archbishop of Milan, Ottone Visconti, O-T-T-O-N-E, of the House of Visconti, V-I-S-C-O-N-T-I. He was rewarded for his loyalty to the emperor, not the Pope, but to the emperor, with the title Capitano del Popolo, Captain of the People. He took control, used this to take control of the Signoria, which was we would think of it as the city council, the municipal executive authority in the city. And as in charge of it, he had the title of Lord of Milan, or the Signore of Milan, like Signor, S-I-G-N-O-R-E in Italian. So Lord of Milan. In 1287, he was aging. By that point, he was 80 years old. The Archbishop appointed his grandnephew, Matteo Visconti, as the new Capitano, leaving political control of Milan to him and his successors, and Matteo's successors in the House of Visconti. So they passed it down, the line, so the Visconti would be essentially hereditary lords of Milan, until lordship came to Gian Galeazzo Visconti. So that's Gian, G-I-A-N, Galeazzo, G-A-L-E-A-Z-Z-O, Visconti. He became the Signore of Milan on the 6th of May, 1385. He held that position for a decade until September 5th, 1395. Signore Gian Galeazzo paid a bribe, basically. It was a bribe of 100,000 florins. A florin was a gold coin minted in Florence. Paid this to Wenceslas IV, and in exchange, the good King Wenceslas created the Duchy of Milan, the Ducatus Mediolani, or in the Italian rendering, the Ducato di Milano, as a state, as a constituent state. So it elevated it from the Signore to a duchy in the Holy Roman Empire, with himself, Gian Galeazzo, as the Duke of Milan and the Count of Pavia. The House of Visconti ruled the Duchy of Milan, which was almost coterminous with the region of Lombardy, from 1395 to 1447. Now, to contemporary sensibilities, to our sensibilities, the House of Visconti was essentially a criminal enterprise, ancestors of the mafia, along with other such families that we've covered, the Farnese, the Medici, the Borgia. Now, this judgment, by our standards, certainly is accurate, largely accurate. They engaged in, protection schemes, protection rackets, assassinations, theft, heists, and all the things we associate with the mafia. So by our standards, it's accurate. Certainly, their behavior violate crimes. According that things violate laws, criminal statutes in all of the Western nations, but the judgment is incomplete without contextualization, which requires us to appreciate, or at least understand, that all of these families, all of these houses, existed in the Italian peninsula, which at that point had no central government to call on for help. So there's no police to call, there's no National Guard. And after the fall of the Roman Empire, as we've seen, Germanic and Scandinavian tribes moved into other former provinces to create successor kingdoms. And the same occurred in Italy. The Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, the Lombards. But none of them managed to unite the entire peninsula into a durable central monarchy, the way that was occurring, and the way that occurred in France, Spain, England. Survival then, for those who lived in the Italian peninsula, became a purely local affair. The absence of a coherent and effective government, at least for the whole peninsula, afflicted local regions as well. So families and alliances of families were the only available providers of safety and the possibility for advancement in life. Now, the presence of sin being what it is, some of these families were entirely parasitic and predatory, essentially bandits who accomplished nothing but theft and destruction. But this was not universal. Some of the Italian houses, like the Medici we covered, like the Farnese, like the Borgia, and like the Visconti, whom we're considering now, invested enormous time, energy, resources into developing the regions that they seized. So promotion of education, of the arts, along with patronage of buildings, roads, bridges, canals. They provided work, attracted commerce, and therefore grew wealth in the region. Visconti efforts of this kind in Lombardy shaped the world into which baby Antonio Ghisleri, the future Pope Pius V, was born. A few examples. 2 such Visconti contributions to the life of the future Pius V were a priory and a university in Pavia, both in Pavia. The friary of San Tommaso, of St. Thomas, in Pavia, was established and abandoned and then repurposed, renovated, repurposed, ancient Roman thermae, a bath, in 1320. Nearby, the first Duke, Gian Galeazzo Visconti, began construction on a church, Santa Maria del Carmine, I can't roll my R's. It's hard to do with both Italian and Spanish. I mean, there's much beauty in those languages, but the R's, you have to roll the R's, and I can't do it. But Carmine, C-A-R-M-I-N-E, Santa Maria del Carmine, is Our Lady of the Song. Anyway, so he built that church starting in 1374. The future Pius V lived in that friary of San Tommaso and worshipped in that church, Our Lady of the Song, while teaching in the university, which is the next thing I'm going to discuss, created by the Visconti, the University of Pavia, And that was 16 years of his life. All because of Visconti investments. In 1361, Gian Galeazzo's father, who was then only the Signore, the Lord of Milan, who's, just to confuse things, his name was also Galeazzo. So I would just, seminarians, if you've taken notes at this level of detail, this would be the Signore Galeazzo, as distinct from the Duke Galeazzo. But they're both of the House of Visconti. Anyway, the Signore Galeazzo, in 1361, obtained a charter from the Holy Roman Emperor Karl IV, establishing a studium generale, a general school in Pavia. This charter allowed the institution, the school, the studium in Pavia, to teach canon law, civil law, philosophy, medicine, and the liberal arts. Although I should have done that in reverse. The liberal arts would come first. So that's the way it was done then. Like you master the arts, then you study philosophy. Only then you specialized in something. So a studium generale, but it's not a university yet. The first Duke of Milan, the Duke Galeazzo, expanded this studium generale and endowed it, and he obtained permission in 1389 from Pope Benedict IX to offer theology degrees at this studium. And that was the last requirement for it to be considered a universitas, a university, able to offer bachelor, licentiate, and doctoral, and magister and doctoral degrees in all of the advanced fields then recognized. So the University of Pavia, in the Latin, it's the Alma Ticinensis Universitas. So the university on the Ticino River, the River Ticino University, but we call it Pavia after the city. The University of Pavia remained the only university in the Duchy of Milan, in Lombardy, in the region of Lombardy, until the 19th century. And it's still there. It's still a functioning university. So when the Duke, Gian Galeazzo, died in 1402, he was followed by his son, Gian Maria Visconti, the second Duke of Milan. Well, yeah, second Duke. He died childless in 1412, so was followed by his younger brother, Filippo, Duke Filippo Visconti. In 1412, his first year as Duke, Duke Filippo, that's Filippo, or Philip, as I've said. He further developed the University of Pavia, inviting and paying, funding prominent scholars to teach, and therefore attract, more students. And he issued an edict prohibiting citizens from his duchy from attending other universities in Italy. Remember, Italy already had the University of Bologna, one at Salerno. By this point, Naples also, where Aquinas went. So he didn't want him going anywhere else. He also constructed, initially when it opened, it was just in various buildings around Pavia, and the campus is still kind of scattered around the city. But he did construct a palace as a base, the main campus for the university, the Palazzo Centrale, which is located on the Via Strada Nuova, the new street. It's quite impressive. It's still there, although it's been tinkered with over the years. But there's some elements that date from that period. Had originally had 9 courtyards and 40 large rooms that were lecture halls. The future Pope Pius V taught there for 16 years. While living in the friary of San Tommaso in Pavia and worshiping, sacramental life was at Our Lady of the Psalm, Santa Maria del Carmine. And all that. So you see that's why I say you have to contextualize these things. So, the Visconti, by our standards, were not nice people. in the way they got power. But once they did have it, and they were ruthless in keeping power. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But they did. But they left stuff behind. They did contribute. They weren't just thieves. So without this, we wouldn't have Pius V. He might have still become a priest, but would not have been positioned to do what he later did, which is implement the Council of Trent. All right. In terms of of his life, also, the Dominicans received further patronage from Duke Filippo. In 1446, he enlarged for their use the church of San Pietro Martire, the St. Peter of the Martyr, San Pietro, Pietro, Martire, Martire. In Latin, it would be martire, but I think in the Italian, they more allied the T and anyway, but you have the spelling. And this was not in Pavia. It was in Lombardy, but not in Pavia. This was in Vigevano. Vigevano. Still in Lombardy, 30 miles west-southwest of Milan. And the future Pius V did part of his formation here before becoming a priest. He did his Dominican formation there. In that institution, again, funded by patronage from the Visconti. Duke Filippo died on August 13th, 1447, with no legitimate surviving heir. At this point, something that is oddly familiar occurred. The faculty and students of the University of Pavia perceived in this an opportunity. Even though their institution only existed because of the Visconti dukes, they decided that the Visconti rule of the Duchy of Milan, therefore Lombardy, had been a benighted dictatorship. Therefore, they acted on a fantasy they concocted of replacing Visconti autocracy with elected representative government. So they proclaimed the Duchy of Milan henceforth to be the Golden Ambrosian Republic, the Aurea Republica Ambrosiana. Oh. It sounds really cool in Italian, but it's still a fantasy. So they elected from among their number. I can just see this. Elected from among their numbers 24 capitani, captains and defenders of liberty. And these 24 guys would have framed laws and a constitution for the Republic in accordance with their vision of freedom and liberty. Because it says that the 15th century is the place to try that. So this is a delusion, of course, but the problem with it is, the innocent suffer from these delusions. It doomed Lombardy to the depredations of a 3-year-long bloodbath. Started as the Civil War, and then others perceived it as an opportunity for invasion, outside powers that coveted the rich Lombard countryside for themselves. Now, before his death, Duke Filippo, of course, obviously knew he didn't have, he had no heirs. Well, I should say he had no son, no direct, no son. So he wrote a will naming as heir to the Duchy of Milan King Alfonso V of Aragon. Now, at that point, Spain also was not a unified country, so it had a number of constituent kingdoms, one of which was Aragon. Well, others. Alfonso was not his son, so, primogeniture came to an end. And this was perceived as an opportunity by others. So the French Duke of Orleans, Duke Charles, had a claim on the duchy through Duke Filippo's half-sister, Valentina. The Austrian von Habsburg family had a claim, as they had two of their members, Albert and Sigismund, were descended from one of Duke Jean Galeazzo's uncles, the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick III. He did not have a genealogical claim, but he invoked his feudal right of escheat. That's ESCHEAT. Now, I'm not making that up. That was a thing. That was actually illegal. It was a law. It was a legal construct in feudalism. Escheat was that in feudalism, if a land would automatically revert to the higher lord if a direct heir did not materialize. So it was exactly for this situation. So he was within his rights because as a duchy of Milan, it only existed as a duchy because of an act of Wenceslas creating it as a duchy. So now the title of duke, since the direct that was endowed, Wenceslas endowed that to the House of Visconti, and there was no more direct male heir. So according to feudalism, then it was vacant. And that's what escheat was. Then it would automatically revert to the higher lord, which in this case was the Holy Roman Emperor, so that he could either keep it himself, keep the title himself, or bestow it on someone else. Now, these were all excuses, of course. What they wanted was theft. I mean, that's all. They all just wanted the resources of Lombardy. So they were willing to invest their own resources in warfare in order to secure long-term control, believing that then they could profitably extract not only compensation for the resources they invested in the invasion and mass murder, but then also make a profit. The first to strike was Alfonso of Aragon, not personally because he was on the other side of the Mediterranean, but through proxy. So all these, the French, the Germans, as we saw back in the media, they all had proxies in Italy. In this case, his in Milan was the Milanese house of Braccesi, Bracceschi. They seized the Castello, the main citadel in Milan, on his behalf on the night that Duke Filippo died, and proclaimed Alfonso Duke by right of Duke Filippo's last will and testament. Warfare commenced immediately. As usual, the innocent population suffered the most, trapped between these contending armies. This went on for 3 years. I mean, all the battles, it would not only would be very depressing to cover them all, but would take us too far outside of church history. So just to follow, how this creates the environment into which the future Pius V was born. Just following that, after 3 years of the carousel of carnage, they turned to a strongman, just desperate for peace. A career condottiero. We've covered what that is. It's a career mercenary leader from the house of Sforza, Sforza, in the person of Francesco, who turned out to be Francesco I, Sforza. His claim to be Duke of Milan was based on his marriage to Bianca Maria, who was an illegitimate daughter of the late Duke Filippo. And he won. He succeeded. He had the home field advantage. And then after all the fighting between the Austrians and the Germans and the French and all this, then the people of Milan then sided with him, since he was a local. They felt at least, okay, he's going to be a dictator, but at least he'd restore peace and ordinary life. So essentially it would be going back to the Visconti model, where the Duke, they certainly would not be free, would not be a republic. It would be an autocracy, but at least they could start living again. Among their children, Francesco Sforza and Bianca, among their children was the next Duke, who I know they just like this name. Galeazzo, another one, but this is Galeazzo Sforza. He became the 5th Duke of Milan. Duke Galeazzo Sforza continued patronage. So again, sticking with how this affects Pope Pius V, he continued patronage of the Dominican order at San Pietro Martire in Vigevano, where the future Pius V would get his Dominican formation. During his reign as Duke, Galeazzo Sforza, when he was Duke and still patronage, meaning funding, contributing money to the Dominicans at Vigevano, someone joined, a Dominican friar joined that priory, who would have an immense effect on the spiritual life in the Duchy of Milan and Lombardy in general. Subsequently beatified, so this is Blessed Matteo Carriero, Carrierio. He became the center of another of these networks, Catholic, underground. I'm saying they're not really underground, but sort of like a network of faithful Catholics, such as the one we covered that shaped the life of Pope Paul IV. Although he was he was from Naples, but so that the faith has always been alive. There's all this feudalism stuff and Renaissance, and that's always going on, and Satan has used it against us many times. But the Spirit is also active, and this is one way that it happens, creating these networks. So, Blessed Matteo Carriero, I've also seen it spelled Carrieri, spelled the same way, just ending with the I instead of the O. He was born in Mantua around 1420. He was baptized with the name Giovanni. Even as a child, he demonstrated piety during religious services. He was able to sit still and actually pay attention. So his family gave him to the Dominicans. He grew into a very effective preacher of moral reform. And remember, that's the charism of the order of preachers. And so he was assigned by the order to make the rounds in Lombardy. In the course of his ministry, he based in the friary of San Pietro in Vigevano. His strategy and his preaching, or I should say, his mission strategy was not limited to preaching. Preaching was the foundation upon which he would build a third order movement. Now, he did not invent the third order, but he made very effective use of it, as were the Dominicans in general. But this is the one that was going to affect the future Pius V, so that's why I'm focusing on this one. Okay, so what is it? The third order movement for the Dominicans was a revival of the ancient Ordo de Penitentia, the order of penance, or penitence. Though now that order existed in the patristic period, though in a different form. So it was revived in the medieval period and repurposed. In 1285, the 7th Master General of the Dominicans, Munio of Zamora, promulgated a document titled The Rule of the Brothers and Sisters of Penance of the Blessed Dominic, the Regula Fratrum et Sororum. It was designed for members of the laity, although secular clergy could join also, wishing to grow in holiness in accord with the charism of St. Dominic. These were to be local groups under a Dominican priest, subject, as that priest was, to obedience to the Dominican provincial, and then ultimately to the Master General of the order. Initially, they were known as the Brothers and Sisters of Penance of St. Dominic. until, in 1405, this construct received papal recognition as a third order of St. Dominic. And it still exists today. Third order Dominicans still exist today. Now, they varied widely in history, according to times, to the needs and circumstances. At times in history, they wore habits of black and white. And at other times, they were differentiated between those who did live in community, so that they would look like they were nuns, although they were not bound to cloister, as distinct from those who were married and lived and worked in the world, but still adopted the rule to say certain prayers, adopt certain devotions, and meet on a regular basis under the guidance of whoever the Dominican priest assigned to them was. From at this time, in the by the time of Blessed Matteo, the most famous late medieval member of this Italian Dominican Third Order movement had been St. Catherine of Siena, who died in 1380. So this Dominican Third Order movement proved to be an imaginative and at times very effective response on a local level to the feudalism problems. The Third Order movement provided an ecclesiastically legitimate avenue to engage the laity in reform of church discipline and building the spiritual life. As with all successful reform movements, as far back as Cluny in the 900s, which we covered in the medieval course, it focused on the basics. In this case, perfection of life through penance, intellectual formation based on exposition of the creed, and spiritual formation. In the lifetime of Blessed Matteo, the spiritual formation focused on the Pauline image of the mystical body of Christ. Biblically based, of course, because Catholicism is biblically based. The first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 12, beginning at verse 12, quote, "As a body is one, though it has many parts, and all the parts of the body, though many, are one body, so also Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, slaves or free persons, and we were all given to drink of the one Spirit. Now the body is not a single part, but many. If a foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it does not, for this reason, belong any less to the body. Or if an ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it does not, for this reason, belong any less to the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole body were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? But as it is, God placed the parts, each one of them, in the body as He intended. If they were all one part, where would the body be? But as it is, there are many parts, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I do not need you. Nor again the head to the feet, I do not need you. Indeed, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are all the more necessary. And those parts of the body that we consider less honorable, we surround with greater glory. And our less presentable parts are treated with greater propriety. Whereas our more presentable parts do not need this. But God has so constructed the body as to give greater honor to a part that is without it, so that there may be no division in the body, but that the parts may have the same concern for one another. If one part suffers, all the parts suffer with it. If one part is honored, all the parts share its joy. All right, that's St. Paul. And so building on that, the image of the mystical body of Christ and spirituality is ideal, is an idealized thing. So, of course, he's seeing all the people as part of the body of Christ. Now, as we know, the presence of sin does not always conform to his assumption at the end. If one part suffers, all the parts suffer. Now, theologically and spiritually, that is true. But the presence of sin, as we know, and as we've covered many times in these courses, tempts those to actively seek the harm of other parts of the body of Christ for sinful purposes. Theft, control, murder, or all the usual excuses. But it's still, and so therefore this biblical teaching is all the more necessary as a corrective. All right, so with that background, Father Matteo traveled up, like St. Paul, used the available system, which in St. Paul's case it was the Roman roads, but for Brother Matteo in Lombardy it was the rivers. So he traveled up and down the length of the River Po and the River Ticino, preaching missions and promoting this version of the Third Order movement. One of these journeys involved Friar Matteo, and two other friars taking ship from the port of Genoa on the northwestern side of Italy to sail down to Pisa in Tuscany. Muslim pirates based in North Africa captured the ship. That was a routine procedure, the background of which we've already covered multiple times. Now, again, as we covered, Muslims are permitted to sell Christians as slaves. So the captain was going to bring the friars to the market in Algeria, along with a mother and daughter who were also captured passengers. The account states that Blessed Matteo so eloquently explained the reasons for his journey that the Turkish captain offered to release him and the other two friars. Now, naturally, he was going to keep the mother and daughter for sale. You don't need me to explain why that was the case, or what he was going to sell them into. Friar Matteo and the other two friars then offered to remain in captivity to let the captain sell them as slaves if he would release the two women instead. And he was moved by their zeal, so the captain decided to release them all. That's a very rare outcome, considering the state of the Mediterranean world, as we covered last time with the Siege of Malta, and as we'll cover in Pius V's reign, with the Battle of Lepanto. In the course of one of his meditation periods, Blessed Matteo prayed for the grace of partaking in the Lord's suffering. His prayer was answered, and he received one of the wounds of the stigmata. In his case, it was the one in the side, the wound in the side, and that remained with him for the rest of his life. But he continued his work. His missionary itinerary brought him to a village of Socino, Socino, outside of Brescia, Brescia. There, the Quinzani family were already Dominican Third Order laity. They brought their daughter to listen to the great preacher. That girl became Blessed Stefana, and de Quinzani. So that Quinzani, and Stefana, that's so Stefana's father, Lorenzo, brought her to listen to Friar Matteo, give preaching and instruction. At the age of 7, in 1465, Stephana began receiving infused graces in the form of visions of Our Lady, St. Dominic, St. Thomas Aquinas, and St. Catherine of Siena. One of these experiences included the grace given to St. Catherine of a mystical marriage, indicating her call to perpetual virginity and therefore religious life. When Stephana was 14, Blessed Matteo died on October 5th, 1470. And shortly after, she received another infused grace, in this case a vision of him, that he was permitted by our Lord to appear to her. And then she was afflicted with pain, severe pain, during this experience, and she realized that she had been given the stigmata, the one wound of the stigmata in the side that he had carried all of his life. In addition to this physical endurance of the Passion, she also experienced a spiritual desolation, as we learned Mother Teresa also did, for 40 years. In Stephana's case, for Mother Teresa's case, it was 50 years, but in Stephana's case, it was 40 years without spiritual consolation. But she still did it, did her religious duty. At the age, of course, this was all in the future, but so at the age of 15, in 1472, Stephana was given the tertiary habit, third order habit of the Dominicans at Cincino. She devoted herself to ministering to the poor and the sick. 10 years later, in 1482, Pope Sixtus IV recognized the late Friar Matteo as a servant of God, which is part of the process toward canonization. And at that point, public devotion to Matteo was authorized. Stephana formed a network. She built on since she knew Blessed Matteo before he died, she built on the network he established. And one of her correspondents, spiritual friends, was older than her, but had a similar vocation story. She also became a beata, a blessed Osanna of Mantua. That's O-S-A-N-N-A, Osanna of Mantua, M-A-N-T-U-A. That's just the city. She was born into the aristocracy. Her father, Niccolo Andreassi. Her mother was Agnesa Gonzaga, who was a member of Mantua's ruling family. The House of Gonzaga ruled Mantua the way that the Visconti and then the Sforza ruled Milan, the way the Medici ruled Florence. Osanna received her first infused grace at the age of 6 in 1455. It was a vision of angels. And from that, she discerned her religious vocation. Now, Stephana had complete support from her parents for her vocation because they were already third-order Dominicans. But in Osanna's case, like St. Catherine of Siena, whom she greatly admired, her family opposed her choice of a religious vocation and instead arranged a marriage for her. And we've seen that. That's another of the feudalism problems, is that families made these decisions with regard, to marriage and church, ecclesiastical life without regard to vocation. In 1463, at the age of 14, she received, secretly, clandestinely, received the religious habit of the Third Order of St. Dominic. In 1479, at the age of 30, Osanna received 3 of the stigmata wounds. The crown of thorns, the pierced side, and the pierced feet. This caused her to reach out to Blessed Stefano, who was known to suffer from one of the stigmata wounds. Another member of their network, who also became blessed, a Beata, Columba of Rieti, Rieti. She was born, baptized Angelella Guardinoli. So Angelella, Angelella, Guardinoli, Guardagnoli. Now, she was the daughter of a poor family in the Umbrian city of Rieti. Angelella came to the attention of the local Dominicans as she apprenticed to her mother in spinning and sewing for the local friars. This led to her being educated by the Dominican sisters. As a small girl, her first infused grace came in the form of a vision of Jesus enthroned, surrounded by saints. Discerning a religious vocation, she also encountered resistance from her family for the same reason that they arranged a marriage for her. Now, her approach to dealing with that was she shaved off her hair and sent it to the prospective groom, trusting him to deduce the meaning, which he did. Angelella became a Dominican, third order Dominican, tertiary, in 1486 at the age of 19. And in religion, she took the name Columba, which means dove, so it's a reference to the Holy Spirit. Okay, all this is going on in Lombardy. So back to the Duke of Milan. So by this point, we meet the 6th Duke of Milan. Duke, this is another one with the name, but it's not the same person. This is Duke Giovan Galeazzo Sforza. So we'll stick with the first, the Giovan, Giovan. He was the 6th Duke of Milan, House of Sforza. In 1488, he sponsored, meaning paid for, an immense undertaking. He had 2 existing small churches in Pavia torn down. They were near each other. One Santo Stefano, another Santa Maria del Popolo. And he replaced them with a larger edifice that encompassed all the area, and that became the Cathedral of Pavia, the seat of the diocese. As the Italians, the Duomo, that was their name for the cathedrals. The Pavia, the Duomo di Pavia, the cathedral in Pavia, houses the remains of Saint Cyrus, who was the founding bishop of Pavia in the patristic period. It was also said to possess one of the thorns from the crown that the Romans put on Christ to torture him. Connecting this to earlier material we covered, both the architect Donato Bramante as well as the artist Leonardo da Vinci were among the many employed on this vast project. The footprint of the church was a Greek cross, meaning all 4 quadrants were equal size, 276 feet long each. They intersected, it's a cross, so it intersected, and over where it intersected, over the intersection, a dome was constructed, which turned out to be, it still is, the 4th largest dome in Italy, 318 feet tall. Now, at the time, St. Peter's Basilica had not yet been rebuilt, so that dome didn't exist. But in retrospect, from our perspective, the only domes in Italy larger are the Dome of St. Peter's in Rome, the Dome of the Pantheon, also in Rome, and the Cathedral of Florence, the Duomo in Florence. Santa Maria del Fiore, Our Lady of the Flowers. In 1490, Blessed Columba was assigned to establish a third order convent in Perugia, Italy. There, she was much sought after as a spiritual guide. During this period, the Perugia period, she networked with other tertiaries we've already met, Stefano Osana, as well as others. I just focus on them because they're all beatified. So, the church has already, credentialized them, their spirituality. Her reputation for sanctity, as supposedly offended Lucretia Borgia, who was an illegitimate daughter of Pope Alexander VI. And she was so offended by the contrast that Lucretia tried to have Blessed Columba, well, at that point, Mother Columba, hauled before the Inquisition and charged with witchcraft. Surprisingly, Lucretia's father, Alexander VI, he actually admired Columba and Osana and all these others, and he prevented any action taken against them, though he never did find the strength to amend his life accordingly, which means he knew. I mean, deep down he knew that he wasn't, but he would not allow them to be punished because of the conspicuous contrast they presented to his own life. Mother Columba spent the last 11 years of her life as prioress in Perugia. She died on May 2nd, 1501. When she died, Blessed Osana was granted a vision, well, Sister Osana then, was granted a vision of her soul being taken up into heaven. In 1498, 3 years before Columba's death, Lombardy was plunged into the abyss once again, because you see things of spiritual holiness, were being promoted in Lombardy and the Duchy of Milan. So, of course, satanic attack, was inevitable. And it occurred in 1498 using politics, ambition, economic and political ambition, which has always served Satan so well. France, Spain, Germany all waged war to assert their claims to control the lucrative Duchy of Milan. And this was followed by the Protestant movement and more wars, which included the sack of Rome in 1527. We covered all that in great detail earlier in the course. So when the international anti-papal protest movement commenced, the Protestant movement commenced in 1517, Antonio, the future Pope Pius V, was age 13. The following year, in 1518, he traveled 27 miles northeast, to join the Dominicans, the order of preachers, entering their friary at Voghera, Voghera, on the river Stafora. That's a 36-mile-long right-side tributary of the River Po. The Dominicans asked him to submit a list of 3 religious names, which they would select. And the first on his list is the one that they allowed him to keep, and that was Michele, the Archangel Michael. And so he became Brother Michael, Brother Michele. They sent him to Vigevano for his formation. So that brings him to San Pietro Martire, which we've visited, which is 34 miles north, to the same priory that had housed the late, who's deceased now, but the friar, later Beatus Matteo, Blessed Matteo. This was his first contact, now Brother Michael's first contact with a network maintained by Matteo's spiritual sons and daughters. And he thereby benefited, as they had, from the patronage given by the House of Visconti. And those benefits continued to echo down history long after the Visconti themselves were extinguished from power. The characteristics most often mentioned of him from his earliest years, these years of his formation, were his personal holiness and his piety. Even as a novice, the older men charged with his formation felt at times unsure of themselves around him, because he radiated the strongest sense of self-assured union with God that they had encountered. One of them described him as having no clouds in his spiritual sky. So now Brother Michele was then sent, after his novitiate, he was sent 150 miles southeast to Bologna, to the most spiritually significant Dominican church in Italy. The future saint, Dominic, we've covered Dominic, but Dominic Guzman, arrived in Bologna in January of 1218. Blessed Reginald of Orleans, a contemporary Dominican, one of the early Dominicans, established a friary in the city of Bologna in the same year. That soon became too small, so in 1219 the friars relocated to the church of San Nicolo of the Vineyards, outside of the city. St. Dominic himself settled in that church and used it to host the first two general chapters of the order in 1220 and 1221. St. Dominic actually died in that church, well, the friary, you know what I mean, attached to the church. He died there on August 6th, 1221, and he was buried behind the altar of San Nicolo. Between 1219 and 1243, the Dominicans bought all the land around the church of San Nicolo, on which they constructed a new church and a new friary complex. That became the Basilica, San Domenico, Basilica of St. Dominic. The remains of St. Dominic were moved in 1233 from behind the altar to a marble sarcophagus in the right aisle of the church, so it would be more easily visited by the faithful. In 1267, the remains were moved again from the sarcophagus into a new shrine. When I say moved, it's all in the church, but I mean just moved to different parts of the church. The Arca di San Domenico, the shrine of St. Dominic, and it was decorated with episodes from the life of St. Dominic by Nicola Pisano. With his formation complete, Brother Michele then had an attack of scrupulosity. He did not feel worthy of being ordained a priest. And he told his superiors he was content to just stay a brother and serve the order that way. So he had to be commanded under obedience to accept priestly ordination. And under those terms he did. He was sent 185 miles west to Genoa to be ordained a priest in 1528. This took place in, what was then a Dominican church, Santa Maria de Castello in Genoa. After ordination, his first assignment was to go 82 miles north to Pavia. For the next 16 years, from 1528 to 1544, Friar Michele, simultaneously held two jobs for the order. So seminarians, say that, get ready, yes. The tree of pain has many branches. First, for job number one, he was a teacher of philosophy and theology at the University of Pavia. Second, he worked for the Inquisition in Lombardy, the Duchy of Milan. At the University of Pavia, he once more benefited from the patronage of the long-gone Visconti and the more recently supplanted Sforza. So, that's planting those seeds. Sometimes they work. So he was staying in the friary of San Tommaso in Pavia and teaching at the University of Pavia. Founded and later expanded all those facilities. It's all because of the patronage from these laity who were long gone. He never lost the touch with the network maintained by the spiritual children of Blessed Matteo. Like all those in the circle of Blessed Matteo, Father Michele was a lifelong practitioner of mortification, severe personal asceticism. We also covered this in earlier courses, both the patristics in the section on St. Basil, as well as the medieval course in the section on St. Peter Damian. Mortification is derived from the Latin verb mortificare, which means to kill, referring to killing the sinful desires that we feel, and our vulnerability to temptation. In his case, the future Pius V, this mortification included sleep deprivation, near starvation level fasting, 2 1-hour-long periods spent before the Blessed Sacrament every day, one during the daylight hours and the other at night. And the final characteristic, most often mentioned by those who knew him, was silence. If he did not have to speak about his work or his teaching or some spiritual matter, then he just did not speak at all. That was not to be rude, it was just, like there was always a telos, there was always a reason to speak. And if there was not an actual reason to speak, then he was okay, just remaining silent. Now, of course, today, they probably pump him full of medication to make him, hyper. Because this says something like that. That's misinterpreted. So the idea that someone might just remain silent for spiritual reasons, that doesn't occur to our depraved, malfunctioning, spiritually palsied creature thing that we call our culture. His evidence of continued personal sanctity prompted the network to bring him to the attention of another network that we've already met, that which supported Gian Pietro Carafa, who became Pope Paul IV. In this way, they became acquainted with each other, and in 1550, Michele was assigned to work full-time on the Roman Inquisition. It was reported that those brought before him would actually have preferred being whipped instead of enduring just an hour talking to him, because his presence he had such a spiritual valence about him, and he had an ability which frightened them, that he could understand their souls better than they did themselves. This can be quite intimidating. 6 years later, Pope Paul IV ordained him Bishop of Sutri, S-U-T-R-I, 31 miles from Rome. The next year, 1557, while keeping those jobs, so while still in the Inquisition, still Bishop of Sutri, he was also appointed to the College of Cardinals, and he was named one of the Inquisitors General of the Church, which meant more work, more traveling, more meetings. Seminarians, this is where you're going to love the meetings once you're ordained. 2 years later, in 1559, he became Bishop of Mondovi, M-O-N-D-O-V-I, 50 miles from Turin, in the Piedmont section of Italy, that's northwest Italy. His patron, Pope Paul IV, as we covered, was deeply unpopular at the time of his death. And Cardinal Michele did little to endear himself with the next pope, Pius IV, who was, you remember, a Medici. When that pope, the Medici Pope Pius IV, wanted to engage in a typical Medici activity, appointing a 13-year-old relative to the College of Cardinals, Cardinal Michele denounced the Pope to his face for hypocrisy, for proposing to do something that he was at that very time endeavoring to end by means of the Council of Trent. So remember, this Pius IV is the same one that brought the Council of Trent to a conclusion, so he knew the feudalism problems and what they did to the church. Yet he was just going to perpetuate it. So the Pope did not appreciate this. He sent Michele away from Rome and did it anyway, did what he wanted to do anyway. But he did not remove Michele from the College of Cardinals, which indicated, like Alexander VI earlier, with Blessed Columba, that deep down he knew he was wrong. So that is how Cardinal Michele Ghisleri was able to participate in the conclave after the death of Pius IV, in which he accepted election as Pope 225 on January 7th, 1566, taking the papal name Pius V. Let's see how long we've been going here. All right, so I'm going to stop here so the file isn't too long. And I'm going to upload this and then start videoing the next one. So this will be Pius V A, Part A, and the next one will be Pius V, Part B. And I think we should be able to fit everything in the next one. So for the moment, thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.